Welcome to Beyond the Music, the podcast where we dive into the lives and stories of people who shaped the world of music. I am Karina.
And I am Lena. We're both classically trained singers, and in this podcast, we explore how music connects with history, humanity, and the voice in all its power.
In our previous episode, we discussed pulling back the curtain of opera. And today, it is my turn to host the episode. And the topic I picked today is very Shakespearean.
Ooh, okay.
Can you guess the topic?
Shakespearean? I mean, he wrote a lot of plays, which are also put into music.
You're on the right track.
Romeo and Juliet, or Hamlet, or I don't know. Or is it about Shakespeare's plays put into music?
You got it.
Okay.
And there's a reason behind this topic. My inspiration was August 15 in 1057. King Macbeth is killed by Malcolm Canmore. So a little bit of Scottish history. At the Battle of Lumphanan, King Macbeth of Scotland is slain by Malcolm Canmore, Scottish history. At the Battle of Lumphanan, King Macbeth of Scotland is slain by Malcolm Canmore, whose father, King Duncan I, was murdered by Macbeth 17 years earlier. So this inspires Shakespeare's play Macbeth. So these real-life people inspired the characters of Shakespeare's play. For example, King Macbeth, everyone knows Macbeth. Malcolm Canmore, in Shakespeare's play, Malcolm does restore himself to the throne, but in Shakespeare's play, it is actually Macduff who is the one to kill Macbeth. So it is based loosely on history. According to the Metropolitan Opera's website, to date, almost 300 operas have been based entirely or in part on Shakespeare's work, including Charles Gounod's Romeo and Juliet. Of course, we have Verdi's Macbeth, Otello, Falstaff, and a little more recent, Benjamin Britten's A Midsummer's Night Dream. I was curious, if we were to spend only 5 minutes on each of these 300 operas, this episode would be approximately 25 hours in length. Safe to say, Shakespeare has had an incredible inspiration on opera. Among the operatic Among the operatic adaptations of Hamlet, for example, one can find Luigi Caruso's 1789 Amleto, also the French Grand Opera in 5 acts of 1868 by Ambrose Thomas, as well as Latvian composer Jānis Kalnišs' 1935 musical tragedy that is just based off of Hamlet. Of course, we all are familiar with Shakespeare's plays. They are quite long. Translating Shakespeare's plays into operas presents challenges, particularly in terms of length. Operas often require significant cuts to the original text, and composers may focus on specific characters or storylines to fit the operatic format. For example, in its standard spoken version, Hamlet takes more than 4 hours to perform. And since singing takes more time than speaking, most operatic adaptations of Shakespeare must undergo significant cutting. One possible solution is to set only part of the history. For example, Ambrose Thomas's Hamlet, which was premiered in 1868. The opera's libretto by Michael Carré and Jules Barbier includes only half of the characters from the original play, but setting the story to music gives it twice the impact. For example, the written aria of Ophelia's Madness, which is sung by Christine Schaefer. I listened to that recording and I highly recommend it. Another option to cut down time is to focus on a single character. A couple examples are Henry Purcell's 1692 The Fairy Queen, adapted from A Midsummer Night's Dream, as well as Francesco Maria Veracini's 1744 Rosalinda, based on As You Like It. So those are two ways that composers and librettists have been able to cut down Shakespeare's words in order to fit the operatic mold, also in a more reasonable time frame. So the earliest opera based on Shakespeare was likely an adaptation of Macbeth from 1664, written less than 50 years before Shakespeare's death. We then have Henry Purcell's The Fairy Queen, premiered in 1692, which was based off of A Midsummer's Night Dream. This opera is usually dubbed the first Shakespearean opera, usually. Though The Fairy Queen was one of the most expensive shows of its time, it ultimately lost money during its initial run. So it wasn't a success at all, but it is an opera that has stayed the test of time. Actor-manager David Garrick's opera version of The Tempest from 1756 was accused of castrating Shakespeare's original play.
Oh.
Lena. And your episode. So there was a lot of success. There were also negatives because people love the original Shakespearean work. However, putting it into music had its challenges, as we have discussed. The next opera I would like to touch on is Rossini's Otello from 1816. Though Rossini's Otello was the first operatic adaptation of its namesake Shakespeare play, Verdi's version is more popularly revived today. In Rossini's Otello, Desdemona is shown as a heroine whose strength outweighs against three male characters. We have Iago, the villain, Rodrigo, the rejected lover, and Otello, the interloper. And for the record, all of those roles are tenors. Rossini replaces the famous handkerchief, that shockingly intimate piece of female lingerie, with the more acceptable, misdelivered, unaddressed letter of Italian comedy. So we clearly see here from Shakespeare's writing a handkerchief, we have now opera, the unaddressed letter. So we have already deviated from the original story. Yet in the final act of this seminal opera, Rossini introduced a quotation from Dante's Inferno. So we have another deviation from Shakespeare. This quotation from Dante's Inferno is sung by a passing gondolier, which prompts Desdemona to sing an elaborate willow song that she accompanies on her harp, followed by a very moving prayer leading on to the murder scene and a terse conclusion. Now, Lena, have you ever sang the willow song?
No.
I have. Back when I was a beautiful soprano. Not a mezzo right now. It is stunning piece of music. Rossini especially, but I must say, Desdemona's willow song, I personally appreciate the Verdi version a bit more. Just a bit. Otello is the only Rossini opera to end in this tense, unhappy manner. And the influence of this last act on 19th century opera has proved enduring and far-reaching. Now, how do you think people of that time related to the opera? Do you think they liked it or do you think they didn't?
Oh, I'm going for the people. I think they liked it.
I love how positive you are. Here's a couple of examples of the public's impression. Lord Byron, in an 1818 letter to the poet Samuel Rogers, berated Rossini's librettist, for again crucifying Otello. And this letter was from 1816. We then have French poets Victor Hugo and Alfred de Vigny made endless fun of this so-called, in quotes, improvement. So we had a couple of negatives. However, the painter Eugène Delacroix was so impressed by this reading that his paintings show Desdemona, not Otello, as the protagonist. A recording of this piece that I would highly recommend is a recital performance of A Vieni nel tuo sangue, featuring Lawrence Brownlee as Otello and Javier Camarena as Otello's nemesis, Rodrigo. Moving into some of Verdi's Shakespearean works. The most notable is, of course, Macbeth from 1847. Verdi said of Shakespeare's original play, "This tragedy is one of the greatest creations of man. If we can't make something great out of it, let us at least try to do something out of the ordinary." A notable aria from this opera is Lady Macbeth's Vieni t'affretta, when Lady Macbeth celebrates her husband's newly acquired power in the aria. Another Shakespearean Verdi opera is Falstaff from 1893. And the Shakespearean inspiration for this was The Merry Wives of Windsor and parts of Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. So it was a good mixture of all 2 or 3, if you want to consider parts 1 and 2 separate entities, of these Shakespearean plays. Moving on to another famous opera, Gounod's Romeo and Juliet from 1867. We all know this one. Gounod's first version of Romeo and Juliet had spoken dialogue between scenes, which was later replaced with recitatives. Diana Damrau as the role of Juliet, singing Je veux vivre, in which she sings of her love and fleeting youth, has been immeasurable, that recording. I highly recommend listening to it. Now, again, when I was a soprano, I did sing this aria. Have you ever sang this?
Nope. You know, we switched. I started as a mezzo, you know?
Yeah.
So I skipped Je veux vivre as a fach and just went on to the other stuff, you know?
Yeah, I forgot about that. You did. No, I started as a soprano, a high soprano, and I was singing all of this stuff. Now, I don't know if you know this one, Lena, but Wagner even tried a Shakespearean opera.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a reason for that, unfortunately. So his opera was called Das Liebesverbot from 1836. It is Wagner's only Shakespearean opera, the only extant setting of Measure for Measure by Shakespeare. The original performances were a complete failure, and the piece all but disappeared from the repertoire. However, some performances in the mid to late 20th century, as well as recordings, have saved the work from utter oblivion, and they do shed light on Wagner's formative years when he was still attempting to write mainstream music. So that's why hardly anyone knows. But he did try. So Shakespeare has gone into so many different composers. Now, I would like to make a shift into more modern Shakespearean operas. Modern operas, we all know Benjamin Britten's A Midsummer Night's Dream from 1960. Now, here's a little fun fact. When Britten was 15, so a teenager, he played viola in a production of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream with incidental music by Mendelssohn. So I guess while he was in the orchestra pit playing incidental music, he was inspired by Midsummer Night's Dream at that young age. Isn't that fascinating? Moving on to Ambrose Thomas's Hamlet from 1868. The opera's libretto by Michael Carré and Jules Barbier includes only half of the characters from the original play. As I mentioned at the beginning, this was a way in order to cut down on the time. The opera poises Hamlet mostly against Gertrude, his mother, and his beloved Ophelia, but it also offers interesting insights into the political questions that troubled France at that time of when it was written. So, Ambrose Thomas wrote it in 1868, which was 2 years before the end of the Second Empire. After the Second Empire, France moved into a parliamentary supremacy, eventually enacting the constitutional laws of 1875. So you see how present-day political environments have also influenced the Shakespearean plays and operas. For example, in the final scene at the graveyard, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears for a third time, visible to all present this time, demanding action from Hamlet, who immediately kills King Claudius, thus restoring legitimacy to the throne and bringing stability to his tormented country. So very similar to what France was experiencing politically. The opera ends to the sound of the people shouting, "Vive Hamlet! Vive notre roi!" Essentially, long live Hamlet, long live our king. Quick mention to the next two operas. We also have Bellini's I Capiletti e I Montecchi, based on Romeo and Juliet. Berlioz's Beatrice e Benedict from Much Ado About Nothing. I had to put those in because those are staples in the operatic repertoire. Now we move into more modern times. We have Thomas Aday's The Tempest from 2004, so fairly recent. Fun fact, originally, Aday's was commissioned to write an opera about the Jonestown Massacre of 1978, though abandoned the idea in favor of this Shakespearean adaptation. So Shakespeare won again. We also have the well-known Samuel Barber's Antony and Cleopatra from 1966. Yes. Barber's Antony and Cleopatra was commissioned for the opening of the Metropolitan Opera House at Lincoln Center in New York. So Shakespeare also had a place. A very beautiful recording of Cleopatra's aria, "Give Me My Robe," was sung by Leontine Price, and I would highly recommend listening to it. Another modern opera from Shakespeare is Anthony Davis's Lear on the Second Floor from 2013, which is a contemporary reimagining of the King Lear story. I also came across this very interesting work, and this is going to be the last work I discuss. It is called The Enchanted Island from 2011. It is inspired by Shakespeare's The Tempest and A Midsummer's Night's Dream. And here are the composers: George Frederick Handel, Jean-Philippe Rameau, Antonio Vivaldi, et al. So even more. So picture this, A Midsummer Night's Dream, but it is set on an enchanted island. This whole opera is called a pasticcio, meaning the score combines works of many composers using text from a newly created libretto, which is why we have so many different composers spanning many, many generations. The librettist, Jeremy Sams, began work on The Enchanted Island along with a team of collaborators. And here's another example of the length. His initial playlist of works to include had 72 hours of music. Can you imagine sitting for 72 hours?
That's long. I had already problems with with sitting with a 5-hour Wagner Parsifal.
Yeah. So it was cut down. So that's good news. It was cut down. A beautiful recording of this piece is actually from Joyce DiDonato as the Enchanted Island's Sycorax, singing Se lento ancora il fulmine, which is actually an aria taken from Vivaldi's Argipo. So, in order to conclude, why are composers drawn to Shakespeare? What do you think, Lena? Why are they?
I mean, not only composers were drawn to Shakespeare, also people were drawn to his plays. So I think it's the same reason. I think his plays are quite raw and honest, but also closer to the people, you know. Not all of them. Some are also like a little bit. I mean, Macbeth is kind of like a horrifying fairy tale, if you want to say, like kind of, you know. But I think that's what people were drawn to, and that's why composers like wanted to put his plays into music.
Well, it's also impressive because Shakespeare's work not only influenced opera, it was not only used to mark significant occasions like the opening of the Metropolitan Opera in New York, but it has also made its way into other art forms, painting, musical theater. West Side Story is the best example of that. And I came across this quote that I would like to conclude with. According to Brett Dean, his works are full of music, meaning not only the musical references and songs contained in the plays, but also the rhythms and shapes of Shakespeare's language itself.
Nicely put.
I think it was very beautiful. Well, I hope you enjoyed Shakespeare's influence in opera as much as I did researching it. I must admit it was very hard to trim it on my end because there was... I can definitely feel for the composers when they have to trim Shakespeare's work. There's just so much information on it. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Next time, we'll delve into another fascinating chapter of music history. Until then, keep listening and discovering the stories beyond the music.
See you next time.